This is the Better Ottawa podcast. My name is Neil Saravanamutu. I am joined today by Gio Petti. Gio, welcome.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Now, some people may recognize that name as the local filmmaker who's been producing some short documentaries on OC Transpo. So, Gio, why don't you start off by telling us what are these films that you've been making?
So I've made so far two documentaries, one in 2024 and one releasing actually just about a week ago in 2026 on Ottawa's public transit system and, OC Transpo, who runs the system. And going into a lot of the issues of the system and, issues with how it's run and how it affects commuters, particularly, anyone can report on, how bad the transit system is. And with OC Transpo, it's very easy to. But I wanted to have a very personal perspective, and I've tried to do so in both of my documentaries and how it's affected me and people in my community. The first documentary, which was released in 2024, which is called Dude, Where's My Bus, sort of goes into issues with the bus system in the area, how it affected me, and the issues of implementation of the first rail system. And the second documentary, which just released a few weeks ago, which is called Train to Nowhere, goes into issues with the train line, particularly the implementation, how it became a hot button political issue, and the current state of that rail line and how it affects transit in where I live, Riverside South.
Okay, so Gio, this is a train to your neighborhood in Riverside South. You say it's a train to nowhere. That's how you've titled it. Why did you choose that title?
Well, I chose Train to Nowhere based on the history of the line. So that line is called Line 2. And when Line 2 was originally introduced, it was just known as the original O train. So there wasn't Line 1. It was just the one line. It was just the O train. And that was a short 5-stop trip from Greenboro Station in, I guess you would call that the south, to Bayview to connect to buses downtown. And that was a very ambitious project. And it was made as a pilot to test to see if rail was feasible for Ottawa. And
just remind us, what years was that?
That was 2001. So that was 25th year anniversary this October. So very exciting time. And despite the project being successful and being able to connect people to more places of the city, a lot of critics with very short-sighted views called it the train to nowhere. There's a whole section in the documentary where I talk about how people criticize it as a train to nowhere. So I thought, oh, that's a perfect way to tie it in, because where I also live, Riverside South, was derided by many people as the middle of nowhere. And a lot of people said, well, that's your fault for living in the suburbs. You should not expect good transit because you live in the middle of nowhere. And so I decided, what a perfect name, because it ties in both of these factors. And, this train to nowhere turned nowhere into somewhere. So that was my biggest inspiration for giving it that title. And the funny thing is, there's been a lot of people who's criticized the documentary just on that title, haven't even watched it. Back when the trailer was released, I got a fair bit of flack for it. And, there was little even hints in the teaser trailer that it wasn't my opinion and it wasn't the case to call it that. But a lot of people don't even watch it. They just leave a nasty comment saying it's the train to nowhere. But I find that quite funny. And I was very proud to give it that title. So, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, you make it clear in the documentary that you are a fan of the train.
Absolutely.
I take it you're a fan of transit generally, are you?
Oh, 100%. I love trains. Anytime I go to a new city or anytime I'm on vacation, I use it as an excuse to ride their public transit. And, I'm not the type of guy, and it's easy, and some people might assume I am just from the way I kind of sensationalize things. I don't want to overly criticize transit. I think having functional transit is great. If I didn't have to make these documentaries, I would be happy, because that would mean transit is running well. But I love functional transit. I love transit that's great. I think a great example, and it's not perfect, is Montreal. I think a lot of, you ask people in Montreal, they say their transit's not perfect, but, riding it from Ottawa, it's pretty fantastic. And, Toronto as well. I love their subway system. So I love transit. I love experiencing transit, and I want to see Ottawa do better,
Yeah. Well, can I ask, you've clearly put a huge amount of time into these documentaries. Mm-hmm. And I remember the first one, there was a lot of discussion about this being a labor of love over like a year or something, right?
Correct.
So can you tell us about yourself and like why you're putting so much time into these documentaries? And quite frankly, is this not something the local media should be doing?
I've thought about that a lot. about I really when Dude Where's My Bus started, I knew like it was something that I wanted to talk about these issues because there was such a it was such a weird because you mentioned the local media and even back when I started the production, which was like mid 2023, you could switch on CBC, CTV News, or even open up like an Ottawa Citizen newspaper, and there's articles upon articles and stories
Yeah.
about how bad the train is, and some with a personal perspective. But I just felt like it would just be like buses are canceled, trains are canceled. So I really wanted to have a sort of contextualized story about how it affected me and like my exploration to finding out how these issues happen. And the amazing thing when I made this documentary is that in the path of talking to people, I learned things that, weren't really being reported on, or they would be reported on once. And that's the way the news is. So it was really incredible to talk to people and learn more about this and research and learn more about this, because I think history is a very important part to understanding the transit system. I'm really big history buff, particularly on Canadian media. Like I really love
Hmm.
learning about, how things are made, and going back in archives and finding out all these, reading these stories and finding out all these information was really essential to how this piece came together. I kind of realized why the Canadian media, why local media won't go too in depth on this topic, and I don't blame them because there's so many aspects to it. I guess you could say I've had the freedom to sort of research this in my free time, but like it was an incredibly difficult process, and
Yeah.
I'm blessed to be able to do it. So
Yeah. Well, listen, there's a number of interviews from people like Alex Cullen, who was a counselor at the time, very much involved with it. Out of curiosity, did you put in a request to anyone like Jim Watson to get his comments on this?
first of all, I would love to have talked to Jim Watson. I think he made a lot of mistakes as far as the LRT goes. I actually really liked him as mayor. I think he made some, I think he did some great things for us. I would have loved the chance to talk to him. I reached out a few times through the means to contact him that I could. And unfortunately, I was not able to get anything. I also tried to reach out to Bob Shirelli, Larry O'Brien, a lot of key figures, and unfortunately, you just don't hear back.
Yeah.
And I would still love a chance to talk to these people. So in case this goes out to them, please do drop me a line. I still would like to talk to you. I'm sure. Again, I'm sure they would
Yeah.
probably wouldn't be happy about the depiction. But yeah, that's the hardest part of this. You just really shoot those shots, and sometimes you just don't hear back.
Well, I mean, one thing that your film does, it provides almost like an archival history of what happened, which, quite frankly, we're in danger of losing very quickly. Of course, my colleague on the Better Ottawa Municipal Panel, Joanne Chianello, has did a huge amount at the time about what was going on with the LRT and the delays and the accidents and a lot of the reporting on that. And so we have some of that, but you filled a really important gap in terms of how this came to be. And so I want to say on behalf of all of the audience out there, thank you for doing this. We've really enjoyed them.
Well, it's an honor. And yeah, of course, Joanne's work with CBC, that was actually instrumental with this. Like she was on, the CBC itself. I know she was on the agenda talking about it. So I ended up hearing her voice talk a lot about this. And yeah, it's really difficult in some cases, and especially with the 2006 election, which I covered in Train to Nowhere. It was really hard to find these pieces. Like basically, it's almost like and I use it as an example because it's one of my favorite films. It's almost like an Indiana Jones film. You're kind of putting together these pieces. You're almost solving the mystery. And because the thing is, you'll have most of the time, especially in the case of 2006, and maybe even the earlier elections that were mentioned in the documentary, it was a point where internet reporting was just hitting the digital age. So you'd be lucky if you get a couple articles, but it's still not a lot of information, and you'd still have a few pieces of information from like, Wikipedia and stuff. So I had to go into newspaper archives. I had to get like tape recordings of, Alex Munter was fantastic. He was able to provide me actual recordings of the debates that I believe he had someone take, that like someone was in the audience with a video camera. And it was, just incredible to be able to find this information. And thankfully with the LRT, it was very, with the LRT that we had in, implemented in 2019, details on that were still difficult to put together. It was a lot easier because it was in the digital age. But even that point, news outlets that upload clips and stuff, it'll be a situation where they'll have a video of like a news report happening, but a year or 2 years later, the video will be removed and it'll just be like a text saying like, oh, there was a video here at one point talking about these things, and this when you go to watch and the video's dead. Of course, you have to watch 2 ads before you get to watch the dead video. But yeah.
Okay. Joe, I'd like to sort of step back and talk about transit more generally, because you've got personal experience with it. You've talked to hundreds, if not thousands of people that also have that same experience. I want to ask you, and from the perspective of someone from the south of Ottawa, is transit a viable option right now?
I think it partially is. I think that the train is not perfect, but I think it's a fantastic option. We've seen the RTO, return to office mandates, and we've seen traffic reports of how bad traffic has been going to and from downtown. And I think if you're able to drive to a park and ride and able to take the train, that's a fantastic option because you can get downtown. Your car's parked, you just return to the car at night. The length of the trip is a little much, but I think like paired with a car, I think transit can work quite well. Right now, it's not that great if you're using a bus and the train to get around. I mean, to be quite frank with you, getting down here, I took the train and I waited for the bus. And the bus was late and I was a bit late coming down here. Unfortunately, this isn't just a case with me. It seems to be a case with so many other people who are taking transit. And it's, honestly disappointing because we're seeing so many people lose faith. I think as the train expands, we're going to see more connections and we're going to see it easier and more convenient to get around. I was on CBC radio last night, and the other guest who was on was talking about how difficult it was for her to get from the park and ride in Orleans to work downtown. And so once that connection opens, that the train will be running to, I believe it will be running to the Place d'Orleans Mall from Blair, like that's going to make connections in that case a lot easier. It's going to make that trip a lot more convenient. But, it's one of those things that we don't know what the future can hold. I've been criticized for my optimism in the past, but I do think having a bit of optimism is needed. But it's a bit difficult to have to say transit is a viable option. But I think if you balance it out with some help, and I know it's a bit privileged to say that, like my family drives me to Limebank Station. Sometimes I don't have that option, and some people just don't have that option at all. So it's a bit difficult,
Well, listen, maybe you could just tell us about what your day on transit looks like. What would be the typical journey, someone coming from Riverside South? Because you talk about a number of your guests in the documentary talk about this and their personal experiences, but what would your day look like? And to that point about family members driving you, I mean, what would happen for someone that doesn't have all those options?
Be screwed. Be screwed. But to be quite honest, it's a bit of a tough situation because basically what you have to do from where I live, the main big road in Riverside South is, well, there's one called Spratt and there's one called Earl Armstrong. And Spratt is more in a neighborhood oriented one. It runs between houses and that's where the buses used to run. But now with the train, where it is, the buses now run along Earl Armstrong. So if you want to catch a bus, you have to go to Earl Armstrong, which, it's not that difficult for me. It's a bit of a walk to get to Earl Armstrong, but once you're waiting for a bus, the buses aren't too frequent. You might be lucky, and once you time your walking well, you might wait 5 minutes for a bus, you might wait less for a bus, but sometimes, you're waiting like maybe 10, maybe even 15 minutes. It's not great. In the summer, it's not a bad thing. Like I sometimes tough it out if I'm not able to get a ride. But there's some cases where it's just, mixed with the cold weather we're having. It's not ideal waiting out there. And especially for buses that are headed straight to the station and, what you'd assume are connected from, there's a park and ride down the road. There's Barhaven over the bridge. You would assume it's a lot more frequent. So I was certainly surprised, and that's when I eventually had to go to my parents and be like, could you please drive me? For some people who don't even have that option, it's like, a 15-minute walk and then, maybe even a 15-20-minute bus ride to get down to the station. So it is quite difficult. And to add on to that, like, the train ride is, I'll as I say in the documentary, love the train. Absolutely love the train. They could do some things better, like especially with the track formations. There's makes the trip a lot longer than it should be, but the train is great. But when you add that already like 10, 15 minutes to, the 35-minute train ride, and then, if you're going downtown, that's another 15-minute.
Yeah.
It adds up. Like you're looking at over an hour to get downtown. And while it's still better option than, driving downtown and then paying like $25 a day
Yeah.
for parking, it's not the most ideal option. And maybe it's a bit of an oxymoron considering to what I just said about, I think you really need to work with a park and ride. Like if you're able to park somewhere and like take the train like from Leitrim or something, that's like your ideal option. But not everybody can do that.
The challenge with park and rides, and I agree that we desperately need something like that.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, but the challenge is that you think about the number of people we want to transport on the train. If I remember from your documentary, I think the original O train was moving 6,000 people a day, right? And so then the question becomes, well, how many cars can you have parked for the day and then accommodate those sort of flows of people?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really tough thing. The thing that I hear about is that the Greenboro Park and Ride fills up instantly because a lot of people will go up there because that's almost one of the furthest points that have a park and ride, and everybody will just go there, get off at Greenboro, get on the train, but then there's a situation. Then you've got Bowesville kind of at the end there, which I was shocked to learn that and something I go over in the documentary, that Bowesville was originally going to be the final stop of the train, and that's hilarious to me because imagine if they ended it there and it's like, well, okay, here's the final stop. To your left, nothing. To your right, more nothing. I'm glad to see that if you go to Bowesville, it is used quite frequently. As much as I'm not the perfect public transit planner, the best transit system I can design is with wooden trains. So I always tell people like it's sort of with public transit, it's sort of, there's like the looking up view that I have, looking at the system, and you see the decisions being made, and there's sort of like the downward view of what the CEO of OC Transpo was seeing.
I'd like to turn to the airport spur, so what we call Line 4. And, I've taken that once.
That's the common thing. People say they take it once.
Well, okay, let me tell you about my experience. I took it remember that weekend when transit was free?
Yes.
I thought I'm going to go out to the airport and check out Line 2. And because where I am, so, we're recording right now in my home studio, otherwise known as my living room, in the Glebe. And so we're not terribly well served by the trains. It's about 2-kilometer walk to any train station from here. When we had the free weekend, I took the bus downtown, then I got on the train number 1 to Bayview, and then train number 2 out to, is it Greenboro or is it South Keys?
South Keys.
South Keys, yeah. And then transferred onto the 4 out to the airport. And that whole trip took well over an hour.
Oh, yeah.
Hour 15, I think it was, hour 20. Of course, calling an Uber would take me 15, 20 minutes. Are people going to be using it to get to the airport and back?
Well, it's the funny thing that I hear about and it's something that I wish I had more time to cover in the documentary. And because it's always nice because I've had a few friends from out of town visit, and I've picked them up at the airport, and it's like, let's take the train. And it's funny that when they take the train at first, it's like they're really impressed by it, but then once you sort of add up all the time, it's like, yeah, it's a nice train, but it does take a while, and timing is a really rough thing. It feels to me like it could have been done a lot better. I understand that now I'm not 100% certain on this, that the airport paid for that spur line. And it also goes to EY Center. But it was disappointing to know that it took so long. I think when you hear airport line and you assume it's connected, because like at least with Toronto's, I believe it's the Up Express, I believe, that takes you to the airport. It's a separate, it's a separate line. Like it's not like you're on, the yellow line of the subway and you just like end up at the airport immediately. It's disappointing, and that should have been done a lot better, especially with the airport. Linebank, my station, I kind of get that wasn't done perfectly. That I can give a pass to, but I was really shocked that with the foresight that you would think that they would at least double track or make that trip more convenient or faster at least. So if you did transfer, like you do have that trip, it would at least be as fast as possible. I think that just goes to show how the segments of tracks that transition from single to double rail, how much that affects the line and the speed of the line, and how much it annoys me to this day that they did not double track it, and how their earliest time at the moment they say it's going to be beyond 2046 to double track it. It just baffles me because I feel like that it would have been, I know OC Transpo and the transit system is in a deficit, but I feel like if you double track these systems and you double track that line particularly and in tandem with line 2, it would have been faster, more convenient, and more people would have been using it. I think though, the one improvement I'll give OC Transpo, and I know it's not the perfect solution, is that they realized that, okay, this line takes too long. So they reinstated back their airport bus service.
Line,
yeah. I was really disappointed that when it was introduced back again, the local media painted it as the train is so terrible that they're bringing back the buses, which technically you can paint it as that. But I see it as they found an issue with the system. They found that the train does not run fast enough to get you to the airport, and they reinstated an option that is faster.
Can I ask you the idea of double tracking line 2 and line 4? How much of a difference would that make?
I think it would make a huge difference. Double tracking a lot of that line, I think, would make the trip, first of all, faster and be able to schedule more trips. 12 minutes is a pretty long time to wait for a train. Yeah. The fact of being able to speed that up and not only have faster trains in between and a faster trip, I think would make it a lot faster to get downtown. And that was exactly what I was expecting when I heard the line was coming in, and my original thing saying it would be able to get around a lot easier and more conveniently. And I understand there's some areas of the train, and I'm sure you've taken it, like there's the Dow's Lake Tunnel, which is an underground tunnel, which is single railed. Completely understandable why you wouldn't double rail a section like that, but there's so many other areas that are out in the open and could have easily built sections to contain the double rail. There was a comment made by Alex Horner of Better Transit Ottawa in the documentary that says that they're going to get slammed by capacity issues, and like, you really need this now. So I really hope that in future we can have that, like that sooner rather than later.
I was very happy to hear that comment from Alex in the documentary, because I don't think people realize that there is actually a plan to eventually double track the line, but it's not in the current transportation master plan. So they're saying it's beyond 2046.
Exactly, yeah.
But I think what Alex points to is there's no reason why we couldn't make a decision to move it forward at some point.
Exactly.
Yeah, because I'll tell you, I actually feel that the issues you just described about, the time in between trains and how slow the train has to travel because of single track, I actually feel that double tracking it might be the difference between this being a really good solution being what it currently is. Let's face it, it's slow.
I understand that not all trains can be like the Shinkansen, running in Japan, like, fastest train in the world. But there was sort of this expectation. And again, my original expectation was, it would be a bit faster. The trip downtown via the bus, like from where you take the bus for 40 minutes and then you get transferred to Herdman, you wait for your train and you take the train for like 12 minutes. And then once you add in all the walking and everything, it basically was like around 59 minutes to an hour. Like, I was expecting that to at least be cut down to like maybe 50 minutes and that.
Yeah.
But I was disappointed to see that it really wasn't, and it really wasn't cut down at all. I'll walk that back and say, like, I'm very grateful that the train exists. And I think that what it adds was better than what we had before, because at least, like, when I'm at least driven to the station, it's not like the question of waiting, oh, where's my train? When is it going to show up? It's going to be there. So.
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask you that question about you. So you believe this is an improvement from what we had before, and let's just remember that obviously there's a lot of money invested, and there's been a lot of embarrassments along the way, right? I mean, the derailment, all sorts of issues with regards to the implementation and the contracting. But from your perspective, it's despite these hiccups, it's a net positive.
I would say overall it is a net positive. I think that I say it's net negative because if we look back at 2006 and what was covered with the extension that former Mayor Bob Shirelli wanted to implement, and then the election, and then Larry O'Brien comes in and that's basically torn to shreds. I think that system worked better than what was proposed, especially with the trains running underground rather than above ground. But we have to think of the fact that if that was implemented then, like imagine how better we'd be moving now, because we would have that system in place and it's like, okay, let's work around this. Again, not a perfect option, but I do think even though maybe the better late than never sort of thought of mine could apply here. I'm stealing another quote. This was said by Brigitte Perlin, who was in my documentary, The Dude, Where's My Bus? And they said, it's like planting a tree. If the best day to do it was today, the second best day to do it is tomorrow. I'd say they are an improvement, and I am very happy. And there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. Line 1 isn't perfect. It has its issues. I was on it a couple days ago and, the train just, stopped for 15 minutes. There was an emergency and the train just stopped. Granted, it was a medical emergency, but it was moving again. It's just, it has little hiccups like that and things happen like that. But, I couldn't be more grateful that they exist.
Well, you know what? That leads to an important point that even if you don't use transit, you want a good functioning transit system in your city. Exactly. I mean, if you're just driving every day, you want people on the bus so that there's fewer cars on the road that you're competing with. Not to mention all the people that actually rely on transit on a day-to-day basis. I think that as a city, we have a certain obligation to make sure that we have options for getting around town that are viable. But can I ask you, looking forward, what do we need to do to fix what we've got? And moving just beyond rail, but in the whole OC Transpo network. Mm-hmm.
That's a really tough situation. I mean, the one thing I was really happy to see is, I believe his name is Troy Charter, who is the current manager. The thing that he admitted in his sort of address is that he sent a memo to council and basically admitted what everyone was reporting on and everyone was seeing. It's like, yeah, we do not have enough buses. They prioritize certain trips and they said we're shifting priorities to buses for these trips. And, it's really difficult to see the system in such a shape. And, I've ended off my documentaries on positive notes with saying that, things will improve. The first documentary was sort of banking on line 2 improving things, which I think it has in a sense, like not perfect, it has. And with this new one, it's, once we get more of these lines opened, I think it will improve the system. It will improve the system even more. But one thing is, advocacy and advocating for a better system. But what I think needs to be done is I think OC Transpo really needs to listen to advocacy groups and people who know how the system works and predict these things. The hilarious thing is about the buses and the e-buses, because they've been waiting on these e-buses and they've been delayed, and that's been a major thing, is they were warned so many times that, don't put all your eggs in this basket. These will not be delivered on time. And lo and behold, they were not delivered on time. And, now, OC Transpo, the CEO, had to come out and say, yeah, they weren't delivered in time and we don't have enough buses now. And it still looks like the rest is going to be delayed. I think they really need to listen to third parties. I think the reason the original O-Train was successful is because it wasn't just an OC Transpo project. OC Transpo looked and got advice from all these advocacy groups. For example, one group that was really consulted a lot on the issue was Transport Action Canada, with Transport 2000 then, and they talked to a lot of people from that organization who designed the stations, helped design the rails, helped picked out the train, and made the original O-Train the success that it was. And, you hear about Line 2's implementation. It's like it was more of a private process. Like it wasn't held from the public. A lot less of these groups were really asked for assistance. So things like that really do help. There are so many groups in Ottawa that exist. Like I know Carleton has a group for transit. There's Better Transit. There's Ottawa Transit Riders. There is so many. And even like going beyond Ottawa, there's so many groups. Like, there's groups in Toronto, there's groups in Montreal. And, there are people who can see what are the best options.
Yeah, although I presume you would also want a very heavy consultation with actual riders.
Absolutely. They're going to be the people using the system because if you probably talk to people who lived in Riverside South prior to this implementation and said, okay, we're putting this station right at the edge of the community. And really, that's also my biggest complaint is that, I am so blessed that they moved the station out there, but the location that they chose was really in this spot that really benefits what's being built up around it. And it's not really in a lot of where the neighborhoods are going. They're going to build a high rise where people are going to live, but it's going to be, it's still not at the moment serving the neighborhoods. And so if you probably told Riverside South residents that this is going to be built, they probably would say, hang on a second. How am I going to get to the station? They're going to say, oh, there's going to be buses. And then you would have the suggestion, oh, it'd be great if they were frequent and I could easily get to one. And like, I know having buses run every 5 minutes is, a pipe dream. But I mean, in at least a rush hour or, at the end of the day, like when people are coming home. So it's really, consultation is a huge thing.
Gio, we're running out of time here. So tell me, first of all, where can people find the first 2 films that you've made? And then the second question I want to ask you is, what's next?
So they are coming, hopefully, I'm trying to see if we can get them on streaming, but for the time being, you can find them on youtube.com. If you simply search up Dude, Where's My Bus or Train to Nowhere, they're the first results. My YouTube page is GeoTV1. That also pops up if you just search that. And as far as what's next, I want to so right now, my goal is to sort of have this be a transit trilogy. I have a third film that I want to push maybe the end of 2027, maybe even early 2028, because I really want to make sure everything I do with that documentary it goes into more serious territory. So I want to make sure everything is polished, everything is factually correct. And so I'm going to push it to then. For the time being, I do want to take a small break from transit, which is why I'm pushing it away. And I'm hoping to do a small documentary, talk about myself, to make it about me. But I want to particularly sort of highlight, my journey after graduating from college. I had a really weird period of time where I was trying to find employment, and particularly in media, and it was a really difficult time. So I want to sort of make a video talking about that experience and the hopelessness of trying to find a job in the Ottawa media market, which is quite difficult, and hopefully have a sort of support for people who are working in media or want to work in media and having a bit of a tough time, and talk about my personal journey and the struggle, and bit of the struggle of being a neurodivergent person, and thinking that you can't exist in this work universe, or thinking you're going to be stuck, as in my case, thinking I'm going to be stuck pushing shopping carts at Loblaws for the rest of my life. Glad to say I'm not doing that anymore. But it's a bit of sort of a, maybe not coming of age, but sort of a stepping stone of life. So yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, we all look forward to that.
Thank
and
you.
We look forward to that third piece in the transit trilogy when you have the time and the energy to get back to it.
Yes.
Gio, just in closing, I want to say, first of all, I want to reiterate our thanks on behalf of the community to you for having done this, because you have filled a gap that was not there. The feedback that I've seen online has been tremendous. And so we really appreciate the work that you've put in for us.
Thank you. It's great to give a voice to transit riders.
Well, listen, thanks for joining us today.
Of course.
And I'd like to thank all of you for joining us. This has been the Better Ottawa podcast.